Today we will be talking about creating tests inside a WT class. So I want to start by talking about or asking everyone a question kind of about your experience with creating tests so far. So hopefully everyone can see a poll out on your screen right now. So I'm just kind of asking what kind of experience do you have with creating tests in WT class? I'm not necessarily creating tests for face-to-face courses that you can hand out on paper, but inside a WT class, what have you done so far? Have you been creating tests? Have you been having ITS? Have you been having us help you with building and creating your tests through all of this transition in the spring semester? Have you never used or created tests in WT class? Kind of what is your level so far? It looks like I got almost everyone who has responded. I'm going to give everyone just another second or two. All right, so there's everyone. So it looks like most of us have never used, and I'll share this back so y'all can kind of have an idea. Most of us have never used tests, and we got about almost quite a third that have used tests before. Maybe you're just revisiting this or trying to find out a little bit more information or some best practices, stuff like that. And so I just wanted to kind of get an idea of where kind of we were all standing from creating test point of view. All right, so let me switch over here. All right, so we are going to get started here. Let me think here. Okay, so, all right, so I'm going to walk you through the process of how to create your test. How do you actually deploy it so that students can actually then potentially access it at some point? And then we will go into how do you take it from a student perspective, so you have an idea of kind of at least partially the student side of things. How do you grade those things and be able to look at things that have been submitted? And then as long as we have time, then I'll go back into how do students then see the review, the grades, and stuff like that. So we're going to look through that entire process here. So we're going to start with how do I create the test? That's going to be creating the test, adding questions into it, setting up some of those kinds of settings with it. All right, so let me switch over here to a course for you. Hopefully everyone can now see my course going on here. So one of the things I always like to start by telling people is we're going to start by building this test in the back end of the course. One of the great features with WT Class when you're building tests is that you can actually build tests but not actually set them up where you have to worry about students potentially getting access to them. So I'm going to show you the back end to start with. So in the control panel, if you go to Course Tools and a Course, you'll scroll down to our Test Surveys and Pools area. And then in our test surveys and pools areas, you'll notice that you'll have several different things. Some of the important things I want to talk about are tests. This is where we're going to be spending a lot of our time. But I like to point out there is a pools area. Basically, this allows you to create kind of sets of questions, whether that's for an exam, whether that's for a chapter, that you can then later pull questions from so that you can know where they're coming from and kind of sort them out so they're not just in a generic exam. It helps to create some kind of level of structuring of organization. If you ever have us help build test banks for any reason, like you get it from a publisher or something, we typically try to put all of those test banks from publishers in the pools area. And that's mostly why I'm trying to let y'all know that this is where those test banks typically end up if we help you build the test banks at least. So we're going to go into tests. So inside a test, you have a build test and an import test. I want to mention this import test. This is not like, oh, I have a Word document, let me import that test in. That is not really an option inside a WT class to do it that way. We do have a program, it's called Respondus 4.0, that will allow the import of Word documents in a very specific format to be able to pull in to import a test in that direction. But it's through a separate product. It's not this import test. Import test is actually, I have a test in one course, I'm going to export it, and then I'm going to go to another course and import it in. One way you can share tests between faculty and courses and stuff like that. So I'd just like to mention that so that people don't think that that's what this is, that it's an import a Word file. It's not. If you were one of those people that had ITS help you, we did it through Respondus 4.0. We had you formatted in a specific way, and we used that third-party software, that extra software, to import it into that software and then import it into WT class. So today we're looking at how do we actually build a test directly inside of WT class. So if you go to build test, to start building our test, we start by giving it a title. So I'm going to just say test 1. Notice there is a description area and an instructions area. Typically, I tell faculty don't put anything in these areas, and that's because this area is hard to get back to. So I don't usually recommend it. I'm going to put some stuff in here so we can see where all this ends up later on down the road, so that you can, in theory, get the idea of why I don't recommend it. And sometimes, so description, this test will cover chapter 1 through 3. Instructions, please complete all questions. Just so I have something in each of these to start with, just so again we can see where does this go. So I'm going to submit this page. Again, on that page, all you have to enter is just a test name. You'll notice up at the top, here's that test name again. There's a little drop-down menu. Depending on your color scheme, sometimes this drop-down menu is hard to see. But if you click on this drop-down menu and click Edit, that's how that gets you back to that page that we were just on. Notice down below here is the description and instructions. Those are those 2 areas I just entered in. So if there's ever any content in these 2 pieces, you have to click on this edit, this drop down, and go to edit to be able to edit those two components. So now we get to the part where we start actually adding in test questions at this point. So I want to ask one more question just to get an idea of kind of where we are in terms of what type of questions do you typically use in tests that you have. If you don't ever use tests, if you've never used tests before, you're welcome to just not answer anything at all. If you know what you're going to be doing, maybe you haven't built any tests before, but you know what kind of questions you want to use, go ahead and answer with that type as well. So far, it looks like we got multiple choice and essay type questions. Essay short answers is the common ones. Again, I'm just trying to kind of get a feel for what types of questions do people typically look for and ask for our students. All right, so it looks like we got most everyone. Like I said, since I did offer the option to not answer, I'm going to go ahead and leave that at this. And just so everyone can see where we're at, so 38% multiple choice, 63% at essay and short answers. So those are the common types. Lucky for y'all, or for at least 38% of you, we are doing multiple choice. I will cover multiple choice specifically, and I talk a little bit about essays as well, essay short answers. And why I grouped essay and short answer is there's technically 2 different options. You have an essay option, you have a short answer option. They're set up exactly identical. They look exactly identical. About the only difference is the size of the text box that students get to type into. And it's really not that much of a difference. So it really doesn't matter which one you use. It's just a matter of what do you want to call it almost. All right, so let me switch back. Okay, so to start creating your questions, so I'm going to go over kind of this bar here. I like to mention upload questions. Again, this is kind of an area you can actually, oops, sorry. This is actually an area that you can actually upload questions in a Word document or an Excel file. It has very, very, very specific directions for how it has to be set up. I don't ever use this. It is so intricate. I end up having so many problems with it. That's part of the reason why I use Respondus. It has a much simpler import formatting. But if you're interested in using that option, there is an option that you can try to do it yourself. Just know I'm not going to troubleshoot why a particular question or why a particular file didn't work, because it is so intricate and requires so many specific things. That's why we go through Respondus versus this upload questions. I'm going to talk about reuse question in a little bit. So I'm going to start with the create question. So this is just adding one question at a time. You know, so there's a whole bunch of different options for how you can add in different question types. Notice that there's an essay here. There is a short answer. I'm going to do the multiple choice just because this is the most common outside of the short answer and essay types. Short answer and essay, basically all you do is you say, what's your question? And then if you want to give an example answer, you can do that. And that's about all the options that there are for the most part. So I'm going to just skip those for now to save a little bit of time and just stick with multiple choice. So we're going to click on multiple choice. I also like to mention that multiple answer is right above that. Just know that it's very easy to select the wrong one. I have a bad habit of going to multiple answer. This gives students the ability to answer with more than one correct answer. Typically, you're wanting the multiple choice, not the multiple answer. So I'm going to click on multiple choice. So we start with the question title. You can choose to add a question title. You don't have to. If we do test banks, we typically add in a question title that references basically what chapter it's from, so that when you're searching through questions later on, you know where it's from. Students do not see the question title. There is no way to make them to be able to see the question title. It is just for your information. So I'm going to just say chapter 1 in here and put a little thing just so we can see what that kind of looks like. Then we start with the question text. So I'm going to add in my question. What color is the sun? Then we get to some of our settings. Answer numbering. How do I want my answer choices to appear? The default is none. Basically, it gives me the answer option that you click on to select it as the correct answer, and then your answer. But you can also have it where it has the answer option and then like 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. So you have a few different options and then the actual question answer option. So you're welcome to change any of those if you're interested. It's not something you have to do, but some people do like something specific. They want it to say A, B, C, D, especially if you have questions that say like answers A and B. You may want to make sure that that type of a question has A, B, C, D on it to help your students a little bit. So answer orientation, do you want it to be vertical? Do you want it to go from top to bottom? Do you want it to be horizontal, left to right? Do be aware if you're using a horizontal, you want your answers to be short. That way they don't get this long column of text. So typically you're going to leave it at vertical, but you do have that option to change it if you have some short answers in there in your ABCD. Do you want to allow partial credit? Basically what that will do is by turning it on, it adds in this little partial credit below each of the incorrect answers. You'll notice correct answer is marked as this first one and it doesn't have the option, but then the second one does have it. Typically what faculty use this for is 2 answers need to be marked as correct. You can add 100% to a second answer, but you could also give partial credit to say this is not the right answer, but I'm going to give 50% credit. So you do have that option to do partial credit. If you select partial credit, you also have the option to actually take away points for a wrong answer if you want to do that. Not always very nice for students, but you do have that option as well. And then show answers in random order. This is something that basically no 2 students will get the same order of options. I mean, clearly once you get past like 8 or 9 students, you're going to start getting similar kind of answer options, but you do have a chance to then not every student is going to get the exact same ABCD. The nice thing, or the thing that a lot of faculty then ask is, well, can I just set this up as a default for all my questions? Unfortunately, no. It is something you have to set up on each individual question, mostly because you want to make sure that every question doesn't have an answer option of answers A and B, because you'd hate for the answer to be answers A and B and not B answer A. It's hard to distinguish what the correct answer is if that is actually the option. So you do have that. The number of correct answers, notice we have anywhere from 4 to 100. So if you need more, you can always add in more. If you need less than 4, it gives you 4 answers by default. You just click on the remove and it will then remove one of those options for you, so you can get down to 3 or 2 answers. You do have to have at least 2 answers for a multiple choice question. And then we get into our answers. So my question was, what color was the sun? Notice the first answer is marked as correct. So I'm going to add that there, but I could easily then say, okay, if I wanted to change it, I just select the different answer for what's the correct answer. It's really easy to choose it. One of the nice things about doing the answers in random order, you could always have the correct answer as being the first answer choice, and then just always have them randomize across the board. And so let me continue on down here. There we go. And so we answer all 4 of our answers. And then down here we have options. Do I want to add in correct feedback or incorrect feedback so that once students complete the test that they get something? It might be nice to include great job as correct, or for incorrect, providing where could they find the answer. So those are some suggestions for what you might put in feedback option. And then down here we get categories and keywords. If we want to be able to search later on for additional questions, to be able to go from like a chapter exam to a midterm or final exam, we can also add in additional kind of categories and keywords to be able to search on different things as well. If you're interested in using those, let us know and we can kind of talk you through what might work best for you and your situation. A lot of test banks don't have those necessarily set up by default. And then lastly, we have an instructor notes. What I typically recommend faculty use this setting for is if you have, for example, a change of an answer or an update to the question or something, adding that in this notes area. That way, if you reuse the question later on, you can go back in and see that instructor notes to see why you changed something later on for some reason. And so then down at the bottom, we can do the submit and create another, which will open up a new clear multiple choice question to start a new multiple choice. But we're going to just go ahead and submit. And I know I'm going through things really fast because I got a lot of stuff to cover. If I ever need to slow down, please let me know. Send it in the chat and I can back up if I need to. All right, so we will notice we now have our question showing up here. It gives us the question, all the answers, what the correct answer is, how many points this is worth. I'll go over changing points here in a minute. But notice now we can always go back to the create question if we need to add a new question in this way. Additionally, above or below any questions, we get this little add question button that appears. If I click on it, it gives me all the options, and so now I can actually add a question right into the middle of the test. When you only have 2 questions, it's not a big deal, but if you had 100 questions and I needed to add in a new question 7, it might be easier to add in this new question in between questions like 6 and 7, rather than adding it to the bottom, which is what the create question will do, and then having to move it into the right spot. So I'm going to add a new question in here and do what color is the grass? And just kind of same thing. There we go. And I will submit. And so we will notice that now my grass is above my sun, and so it added that right in there. If I need to move them around, I can always click and drag my question around. Additionally, up in the top right-hand corner next to question settings, there's the keyboard accessible version that you can easily click on a question, move it into the right spot. You do click 1 click for every movement to move it into the right spot. You click submit, and then it will reorder questions. Sometimes dragging and dropping across multiple pages becomes really difficult, where using this using the keyboard accessible feature can make it a lot easier to move it across. So those are the basics for how you add in your questions, for adding in new ones by themselves. So just a couple of other ways to add in some additional questions. We can then go to reuse questions. So this is basically saying, I already have questions built into my class somehow, whether that's in a pool, it's in an existing test, but I want to reuse those questions. Unfortunately, you cannot reuse questions necessarily from another class, but that might be where you can export a test, import it into this class, and now you can reuse questions from that test. So we have question set, random block, and find questions. So find questions is basically going to let me look up questions that are in this class and add them right into right like this. This is what I call inline questions. because every student is going to get every one of these inline questions. And so it would then just add those additional questions right below. Where alternatively, question set and random block will actually look at a set of other questions, and then you can then say, okay, from this set of questions, I want students to get this number of these questions. So maybe I have 50 questions in a pool, but I want students to only get 20 of them. And so you can then determine, you know, how many questions students might get. And this is one of the recommended kind of best practices for tests, is creating a larger set of pooled questions that you then pull a section from. That way no two students get the exact same test. Every test is going to be just a little bit different, because every student would get a different set of those questions. It helps to prevent some of the cheating, because now if you have two students working together, now they're having to look up two sets of answers, two complete sets, instead of one set of answers and then copy and paste into the other student's test, essentially. So that's basically the difference between these top two and this bottom one. So I'm going to add a question set in. Basically, for the most part, all three of these essentially kind of set up the same way. It's just the end result that's different. So the main difference between question set and random block: question set is going to allow you to look at pools or tests, where random block allows you to only look at pools. Question set, then you specify, I want this question, and this question, but not this question. Where random block, you say, I want from this pool all multiple choice questions, and it's going to pull all of them. The nice thing about random blocks is then you could add additional questions into that pool, and it automatically feeds back into that test. For a question set, you would then have to go back into the question set and say, okay, now I want this additional question and this additional question. Those are the main differences between question set and random block. Neither one is better than the other. It just basically depends on how do you have things set up in your course and what are your needs. So I'm going to do question set. Again, neither one of these is necessarily better than the other, just whichever way you want them. Typically, when you first come into any of these three options, it's going to ask you, do you want to copy questions or linked questions? I generally recommend copy questions. That way, if you need to make any changes, they're kind of standalone from each other in some sense. You can always change that and go back and forth between the settings, so don't worry if you don't get locked into one in any particular way. So by default, it pulls up the pools area. Since we don't have any pools in this course, it's not pulling anything. I'm going to click on the test so that I can actually see my test. Now, typically, I wouldn't say you're going to pull from a test that you're currently building. You're going to look at another test or a different pool. But in the event of time, since this is what is in this course, I'm going to pull directly from this test. So when you click on a test, it's then going to pull over what questions are in there. So there's my two questions. I could individually click on a question. I can click on the select all, so it selects everything. There is a paging, so after about 25 questions, it dumps it over to another page. You might want to click on the show all so that everything appears on once, to click on the checkbox. The nice thing about this is if you do have multiple pages, it does hold between pages. So if you select 3 questions on first page, you move to the next page and select 3 more, it's going to hold all 6 of those questions. It doesn't delete the first set. You'll notice down below, it's going to show you which questions you've already selected. If you click the little button, sometimes it appears below, sometimes it appears right beside it, depending on what size it decides to open up as. But if you click on that list, it will actually show you what questions you've done. That way, if you have a pool that has similar questions, you can make sure you don't get the same question more than once. You can also click on the button to the left of the question itself to be able to view the full question if you're not sure what all is in that question. Once you pull all the questions that you want, you click on submit. It will add it down to the bottom of the page, and so there's my question set. It tells me how many questions are in it, how many questions are optional to be displayed. If I click on it, I could then change it to say, okay, I want all of them to be shown. You'll notice that our question numbering is then updated to 3 to 4 because it is 2 of these questions, and then the total points is showing 2. And so you can adjust depending on what you want, how many questions. Typically with question sets, you don't want to pool every single question, but in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Also, you have the questions in the set option that when you expand out, now you can actually see what questions are there. You can pop them open to review them. You can select them. You can edit them from here. You can remove a question. You can add additional questions, and you can do all of that from here. I also like to point out with question sets, you cannot add or remove questions after a student has taken the test. Once a student starts taking a test, you're locked into the question set. Essentially, Blackboard WT class is saying, if you have a bad question and you're like, oh, I want to get rid of that, I don't want anybody else to get it. Well, Blackboard is saying, I want every student to have the same option to get that bad question, have the same chance to get that bad question. So you can't remove a question after. Same thing, you can't add a question because they don't want you to be able to add in easier questions or harder questions that now later students are having a different option for that. All right, so that is the main setup of how you build in test questions here. Those are the main kind of ways. Again, the random block and find questions essentially functions under the same kind of process. It's just how does it look in the end. Random block gives you the same little option as well to change the number to display. So you can then always, to change point values, you can click on any point value over there and update it this way and click submit. And so that is one way to update any questions that you have in here. Additionally, up at the top or bottom of the page, there's this select all and the points possible, or I could individually select just a couple of questions and say, okay, of these, I want to update these 2 questions to be worth 2 points. And we'll see my first 2 questions are 2, my last one is still 5. I could select all to say I want all of them to be worth 20 points. I can go through and do all of that however I want to set up my questions to be worth. Now, why is that important? However many total points it is what's going to appear in the grade book. Unfortunately, Blackboard is not smart enough to say, okay, you have 13 questions, but I want it to be worth 20 points. 13 doesn't go into 20 nicely. So maybe I want to add a few extra questions or delete a couple of extra questions or make a pool of questions so that it equals out nicely. You want it to get as close to the number value as possible. So if I wanted this to be worth 100 points, I would want to change this to be worth, each question to be worth 25 points. So you have to manually determine that. Maybe a question gets a little bit more points, a question gets a little bit less, just depending on your setup. But you want to make sure that that total points is equal to how many points are going to be set for this course, for this test. So that is the basic information for how do you start by creating a test. So I'm going to click the OK button. And so we start by seeing that now it has our test 1. It tells us it's not deployed, which basically means students don't have the ability to view it, to be able to access it in any way, shape, or form. It also lets us know the last date it was edited. I can click the drop down here and go to edit to be able to get back to that page, that test canvas page, to add and remove questions. I can also export it to my computer if I want to move this to another question as well, or another course. I can copy it, which basically allows me to create a duplicate, and I can also delete it out of here as well. All right, so I got a couple of questions I see. If there's a bad question, after all the tests are complete, can I modify to eliminate the bad question? So yes and no. You don't want to necessarily delete the question, because what will happen is if you have it out of 100 points, now that test is going to be worth 98 points. If that question was worth 2 points, it doesn't automatically adjust the point values that way. What we typically recommend is if you have a bad question, you basically give everyone full credit. You either go in and do that partial credit and assign all answers as 100% credit so that everyone gets 100 points. Because if they got the question correct, you don't necessarily want to give them additional points. Also, there is a way that you can actually set it up to say, or not set it up, but you can actually tell a question, give everyone full credit through the grade by question option, which I should be showing here at the end as an option for grading. So that's essentially how you eliminate. You don't want to actually delete, again, because it takes that points out of points possible and doesn't adjust. You want to set everyone to have the full credit in one way or another. And then also, can you put a bonus question into the test? Absolutely. I did not show that. Typically, so there it is. Under your question sets, it doesn't give this option, but under questions that are in line, there is this extra credit option. Basically, when you check that checkbox and you submit, it removes it from the total points. But if the student gets this question correct, now they get, in this case, 20 extra points on that test. So that's all you do. You just check that checkbox, and then it becomes an extra credit, a bonus question. So it's in here, but it doesn't count towards the total points. It then becomes extra credit to that extent. All right, hopefully that answers all those questions. All right, so then the next set is, okay, now that I've built my test, like I said, right now, students don't have access in any way, shape, or form. The deployed is no, that means it's just in the back end of the course. Now, how do I make it so that students could actually potentially take this test? At this point, it is not in the grade book, it's nowhere. It's just kind of hiding out in the background. So the next thing is go to your lessons area or wherever your content is, and you would go to, if you have an exams folder or your chapter folder or your wherever you want this test to be for students to access, you go to that location. And then under assessments, we have the test option. And so we'll click on that option. And we'll notice that down here, it gives me my test listed from my options down here. If it's not in this list, that means it's already been deployed. You cannot deploy the same test more than once. If you need to have 2 iterations of the same test, then you would have to create a copy, create a duplicate, so that you could have 2 versions of that test. I also like to point out there is a create from here. It takes you essentially from all that process that we just went through. I just like to go through the back end of the course so that you have an idea of when you do even this create test, it's still placing it in the back end of the course to begin with. Sometimes when people do this create, they don't click all the buttons and then they say, I created this test, but I just lost it. It went away. Well, it's in the back end of the course and you didn't finish through all the processes, basically. You can always come back to that assessments test and it would then appear in this box at that point. So you just click on the test you want to add, click submit. And so here we start to build our test. I could edit the test name if I wanted to rename the test. If I change the name here, it also changes it in the back end of the course as well, where we were just at. So it does update the test name across it. Oh, let me see, I have a question. What do you do with a STEP course where you may want extra questions for some students or bonus for undergrads that are running up? So in that case where you have special questions for undergrads versus questions for graduate students, you would probably have to have 2 separate tests, a graduate level exam and a undergrad level exam. There are ways that you could set it up where only like 1 set of students can see it. We can walk you through that if that's what you're interested in doing. But yeah, in that case, you would probably have to have separate tests. There might be some way to work it all into one. That would be something we would talk one-on-one with you on how to set up, kind of what you're doing type of thing. All right. So like I said, you can change the name here. You notice that in my content link description, it brought over my test description. I'm going to add in the test instructions in here as well, just so we can see how this is different than my test description that I entered when we first started. So we can also show it here as well. I'm going to check one of these boxes, but not both, so that you can see where this ends up, but not necessarily where it always ends up, just so we can see all the different kind of areas here. But you can have it show before they begin the test, each one of these, for those information set on the test itself. All right, so the next setting, open the test in the new window. The default is no. Typically, I recommend you leaving this at no, and it's for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons are if it opens up in a new window, at one point in time, we did have an issue where some of the settings didn't essentially show to students when you open it up in a new window, like the timer didn't show. So students didn't know how much time they had. That's been fixed, but there's still every once in a while some reports of quirkiness, and it seems to always come back to the test was opened up in a new window. Also, from a best practices standpoint, when you now have your course in one window and the test in another window, some students will see that and go, oh, look, the course is still open over here. Let me go see about looking up things in the course. Well, if I already have 2 tabs open, why can't I just open a third and go to Google? It almost gives students that impression, well, I can look up answers now. Where if it's all in one tab, sometimes students get the impression, well, I don't want to leave. I'm afraid to touch anything. I might lose this test. So that's one of the reasons why I always say leave it in the same window, just to kind of prevent some of those students from easily seeing that, oh, look, there's more than one tab. Maybe I can do some kind of other things underhandedly and nobody will know. Where if you have it set up to not open up in a new tab, you'll get a couple of those will say, I don't want to touch anything. So we generally recommend don't have it open up in a new window. Also, you have pop-up blockers that can sometimes block it, so you get the student that comes back and says, well, it just keeps blowing up. It won't open up for me. Well, the pop-up blocker is blocking it for some reason. All right, so moving on down the page. So the next setting, make available to students. This is the one setting on the test that you have to change if you want students to be able to access it. Everything else is now kind of optional, essentially, gives you more features and functionality. This is the one setting that if you don't change, students never have access to. I'm going to leave this at no for a minute just so we can see what exactly this does for an unavailable test, but this is the one setting you do have to change. And then add a new announcement. Do I want students to be able, or do I want it to automatically create an announcement for me? I usually say go ahead and leave this at no, because every once in a while I get a report that faculty says, well, the class became available and now it's telling students that every test is available, even though it's not. For some reason, those announcements didn't get set up with the right dates associated with the tests. And so now it's telling students that the final exam is available the first class day. And so people are panicking. So just be aware there is kind of that weird funkiness that randomly seems to happen. We haven't been able to figure out why exactly it sometimes happens for classes and sometimes it doesn't. But this does give you the ability to add in a new announcement automatically for when the test becomes available to students. So multiple attempts is our next setting. So how many times can a student take it? By default, it's a one and done. When you submit your test, you're done, you can't take it again. But you can allow students to take it more than once. There's different rationales and reasons behind it. Sometimes faculty like to allow more than one attempt so that then they can say, you get the highest of 2 attempts. You get an average of graded attempts. So if you think you can redo it better as a second attempt, I'm going to give you an average because I don't want you to just blow your first time taking it, but I want you to try to do better. And so you have different ways that you can then score it based on allowing additional attempts. You can also specify the number. So I can say each student only gets 2 attempts, and after that they don't get any other attempts. One unique way that I've heard some faculty use this is they set it up for 2 attempts, but they set it up to show the score the first graded attempt, which is basically the first submitted attempt, and then tell students if you have any technical issues, if you have any problems, feel free, if you think that it's something that I'm going to approve of, go ahead and take it a second time. Instead of waiting for me to reopen the test for you, go ahead and take it, especially if it's that, you know, it's due at midnight tonight and you're taking it at 11 o'clock at night. And I don't want to be up until midnight checking for any problems. Just go ahead. If you think you had a technical issue, go ahead and take it. Email me, let me know what happened, and then I'll determine, am I going to allow the second attempt or is the first attempt going to stand? So that's a unique way to do multiple attempts. It helps to kind of allow for technical issues without the need to, you know, mediate at that very moment getting access to an additional attempt. So you have kind of those different options. I'm going to allow unlimited attempts right now, just in case I need to take it a couple of times for different reasons. I have all of those options available to me right now. But for most of the time, I don't recommend unlimited because it does allow students to just retake and retake and retake and retake until they get the grade they want. Useful on practice tests, but not necessarily on a test that's for a grade. There's good and bad to doing it that way. All right, so our next section, forced completion. So I always like to take a moment, take a breather, have everyone take a big deep breath so that you can listen to me when I say, please do not ever select this option. It will cause me heartache, it will cause you heartache, it will cause your students heartache. Everyone will have heartache if you cause this. Not everyone, but you have a much higher chance that you'll have some problems that will occur with it. You can see under this, once started, the test must be completed in one sitting. Basically, it locks the student into the test. They can't leave the test. They can't go somewhere else. They're forced to complete the test once they start it. The problem with this setting is that if a student loses their internet connection, I mean, just a blink, just a second, Blackboard will catch it and it submits it on the test. And students panic and freak out and they call anyone and everyone. They call you, they call me, they call help desk, they call the department, they call everyone saying my test just exploded on me and submitted on me and what do I do? And it's because their internet lost connection. Alternatively, I've actually seen someone get a pop-up window like from like their email and that submitted it because it took the focus away from the test. And the test thought that the student was trying to like cheat by going somewhere else, and it submitted it on them. Unfortunately, there's no way for us to know what happened. We don't know if the student left. We don't know if the student's internet dropped. We don't know if the student was maliciously trying something or their dog literally ate their computer. We don't know. All we can do is say, okay, the student started at this time, they answered these questions, and it's submitted on them at this time. And if they contact us in regards to this, that's exactly what we're going to tell you and the student. This is the information we have. And now it's up to you as the faculty member, do you allow them to retake it or not? So there are other ways to help prevent some of those cheating things that this was meant to help with. There are other things that can help mediate that. That's always my next question. Well, how do I prevent students from cheating? Well, there's other options that help with that, not just this. So with that, like I said, one more time, please don't ever select this option. That's why it says highly not recommended. And there's even a page that we've built on why we don't recommend it and best practices that help with, other options for, mitigating this particular setting and some additional information. So with that, what is one of those ways? It's setting a timer. A timer is really highly recommended on all tests. This basically ensures students that once they start the test, they only have this amount of time. One of the things faculty and students sometimes come back with is, well, I started the test, I thought I could leave the test and go to Starbucks and go do whatever and go study some more and then come back and continue where I left off. Well, you can continue answering questions as long as the timer hasn't expired. But the timer does continue to run even if you're not in the test. And I'll show you where it does specifically tell students that here in a little bit. So with that, so if you turn on the timer, you can adjust the time. I'm going to set it just to 5, so it's really kind of quick. Auto submit, once that time expires, do I want to allow additional time? Do I want them to be able to continue, or do I want to have it automatically submit on them? There are pros and cons to each. If you're not for sure which way you might want, talk to us and we'll kind of walk you through which way might be best for you based on your students, based on your desires, things like that. Also then is display until and display after. With not allowing students to have the entire semester to take a test, locking it down to a smaller amount of time to take a test. With that, you do have to realize you don't want it too small. You can't say, okay, you're going to take the test from 2 to 3 p.m. on Monday. That doesn't work, especially in an online class. In an online class, students are expecting to have time to be able to pick a time with what works for them. Now, that may be within 24 hours, and that's fine. But you want to give them at least 24 hours time to be able to take a test. And it just depends on the level of difficulty, you know, what else you're having them do maybe in a week, you know, what chances are that they might be able to correlate with other students, you know, what level of, how much is this worth in your class type of thing as to how much time you might want to give. Again, that's one of those things, let us talk to you if you're not for sure, so that we can kind of give you a guess, you know, some recommendations based on other things related to your specific course. But you can set it up to magically appear at a certain time, magically disappear at a certain time if you want to do that. I always like to point out, you do have a midnight as start, that is, you know, essentially 12:01 a.m. And then you also have the end of day, which is 11:59 p.m. So students lose that 1 second before, you know, that 0.1 second or whatever it is, before the end of the day. But I recommend doing this end of day, not necessarily midnight the next day. Sometimes students see midnight the next day and say, oh, I get a whole nother day, because they're thinking it's midnight that night, not first thing in the morning. So if you are going to do midnight as your due date, make sure you do end of day. You can add a password if you want to do passwords. Again, this is one of those settings. Talk to us. Let's talk through why you might use a password. Same thing with restriction location. You probably won't do this, especially if you're teaching online classes, but it is something that you may look into depending on some different things. So if you're interested in either of those settings, talk to us. Question: is display until the cutoff for starting the exam or when they need to finish? It is the cutoff for starting. So if it is due at midnight and students start at 11:55, they're still allowed to continue after midnight. There are some other things that can kind of help with that to some degree, but nothing actually kicks them out at midnight. And I'll talk about some of that kind of cutoff here in a minute as well. All right, so continuing on, test availability exceptions. This in particular is really used for if you have a student that has a disability that needs extra time, that time and a half, double time. If you have a student that goes through Student Disability Services and gets that approved, they also send the instructions on how to do that. So I don't go over that in this because they do give you those instructions on how to do that. But this is also for if you need a student to take an exam early or late outside of that display after and display until date range. You can allow that by doing this availability exceptions without opening the test up to everyone. And then the due date, this is one of those things about the submitting after, you know, midnight type of thing. If you set up a due date and say it's due at midnight and they don't submit it until after midnight, it's going to automatically send it into needs grading for you to review and mark it as late. Even if it's an auto-graded test, it will send it into needs grading for you to review, and it will mark it as late so that you can see that it needs to be processed in some form or fashion. Then you can also say do not allow students to start the test if the due date is passed. This allows you to leave the test open but not actually allow students to start it. Just know that if you have this checked and you allow through the availability exceptions for students to submit it late, this will block a student from accessing it, even though you've allowed it in exceptions. All right, and then self-assessment options. I always tell faculty, leave it at this. Don't ever change any of these settings. If you think there's a setting in here you want to change, talk to us, because we want to make sure there's actually a way that you can set it up where it basically removes you from being able to see grades, who's done it, anything like that, and there's no way for us to retrieve that data. So we want to make sure you don't do that unless that's really what you're wanting. So don't touch any of these settings unless you talk to us and we kind of give you this is what this setting will do. And then our show test results and feedback. This is after the student submits, what are they going to see? There's lots of different options and you can do different, you know, I'm going to show this, but not show this, just depending. And I'll go over what each one of these check boxes means. But you have basically different ways. After submission is from the time they submit now until forever, essentially. There's not a cutoff date. And then one-time view allows them to see it. After they click submit, they have to click OK, then they will see it. And then once they move away from it, now they don't see it ever again. Also, if they click submit and move away without clicking that OK, they don't get to see the review at all. You can set it up to show on a specific date, show after the due date, which looks back at that due date setting up here, as well as the availability end date. And then after attempts are graded, it assumes that you have something that you have to grade to some extent. And also remember, if you have anyone who doesn't take that test, you have to enter a 0 or some kind of a grade for it to release that to students. With that, you can set it up to have 2 different ones that after submission, maybe they don't see a lot of information, but after the due date, then they get to see more information. And so you do have some of those. If you want it to stop being available at a certain time, you do have to come back in and change it and basically remove the option so that they don't have access anymore. Let me switch back over here to my PowerPoint real quick because I do have some kind of each one of those settings after that. What does that actually look like? So the first option is score per question, and what that does is it's going to show the students the question itself and then how many points they earned. Did they get it right? Did they get it wrong, essentially, or did they get partial credit? How many points did they earn per question? All answers is then going to show the question and then what possible answers, not what was right, not what they selected, just what possible answers were available to them. Correct answer is then going to show the question and then what the correct answer is. Submitted is then going to show the question and then what they submitted, not necessarily whether it was right or wrong or what the correct answer is, just what they submitted. And then show incorrect is going to give the question and then a green check mark or a red X, basically letting students know whether they got it right or wrong. And then here's just an example. If you select everything, they can then see all of this information. The question, what the selected answer was, what the possible answers are, what the correct answer is, did they get it right or wrong, how many points are possible, kind of all that different information. So like I said, you can do any combination of these. Typically what I recommend is show nothing more than like the submitted after submission, and then after it's due or after it's closed, then you start to say, okay, now you can actually see what's correct as well. Because you want to try to prevent students from sharing those correct answers. So setting up the correct answer to not show until after everyone has completed it, basically, allows that to kind of be removed from that option, allows students to not be able to have that ability. I do always tell faculty, if you select any of these options, please make sure you also select the show incorrect questions. You don't know how many times we get students that say, I don't know whether I got it right or wrong. Even though the score per question is selected, they don't seem to translate into, did you get full points? You got it right. Did you not get full points? You got it wrong. They don't translate that. So if you select any of these, we really do ask, please select that show incorrect questions option so they get that visual cue, did you get it right or wrong? And so then continuing on down our page, one of the last ones, do I want to show all questions at once? Do I want to show just one question at a time? I always recommend doing the one at a time, and this is mostly so that there's a connection to the system between every question. If you have it set to all at once, what that will do is all questions appear at one time. If a student gets to question 10 out of 100 and then loses their internet connection, they may still be able to continue on during the test and everything looks good and great. They go to submit and now they've lost everything between question 10 and 100. And that can be really disheartening that they go to submit it and nothing's been submitted basically, and they spent all this time. Where if it's one at a time, when they moved from question 10 to 11, it would have said, hey, something's going on. And it either would have reconnected them or it would have made them basically say, hey, let's try this again. And it would kick them out of the exam and start them to get back into the exam. And so it kind of ensures that they don't lose that connection. So I always recommend one at a time. The downside is you may have a student that says, it's just taking forever to move in between questions. I'm losing time. That is one reason why sometimes, and I didn't really talk about this earlier, sometimes in the question time limit, you may want to add in a cushion period. So what I do is, one of the things is if you're doing multiple choice questions, we generally recommend 1 minute per question. If you have true false, you might not need as much. If you have calculation questions, you might want more. If you have essays and short answers, you probably want more as well. You kind of have to gauge that then on your own. But typically multiple choice, we recommend 1 minute per question. But what I do in my class is I then give an additional 5 minutes. Now, if it's a 5-question test, 5 extra minutes is not what they need. But when I do 20 or more questions, I usually give 5 extra minutes to anything. Basically, that ensures if they have any technology problems, that gives them 5 minutes of leeway time. It takes too long to move between questions. I got kicked out. It has that all built in. So I actually tell students, you know, you have 20 minutes on your test, but I give them 25. If they use all 25, great, they got the extra time. But if they had the technology problem, I now say, you got 5 minutes built in. Unless you can tell me that it really took more than 5 minutes away from your test, I'm not going to give you anything else. I'm not going to give you any benefit of the doubt, essentially. It was already built into the test. So that's just some things to think about whenever you're setting up your time limits. So again, I always recommend the 1 at a time to ensure that connection between each question. With 1 at a time, you then have the option to prohibit backtracking. It is a different style of taking a test. Once you move to question 2, you can't go back to question 1. Once you move to question 3, you can't go back to question 1 and 2. It is a different mentality. And so you have to think about, is that the type of mentality that you want in your course or not? There are very valid reasons for doing that. It just depends on you and your course. I know a lot of nursing faculty actually use this because they have their state boards and state exams that are in the same process. And so it helps get them prepared for that mentality of when they're taking tests, that I need to answer the question fast enough so I have enough time to answer all my questions, but know that I also don't have the ability to go back at the end of the test to look up answers or redo some answers. So again, think about that if you want to set that setting. There's not a right way to do it. It is purely your option, your choice. And then the last option, randomized questions. If you have questions listed in line, I highly recommend doing randomized questions unless you have a built upon question set. So each question builds upon the previous answer. If you have that, you probably don't want randomized, but otherwise I recommend randomizing. That way every student gets a different question set, different order of questions. If you're using the random block or the question sets, that itself randomizes the questions. But if you have multiple question sets, like you have a chapter 9 question set, a chapter 10 question set, a chapter 11 question set, this will randomize those question sets. So those are kind of your different options for randomizing. Like I said, typically, I really do recommend doing the randomized question option. So once you get all your settings in place, you click submit. And so now it's going to essentially be available to students. Once we do this, it is now connected to the gradebook. So I don't have to do anything into the gradebook to set it up. It's now in the gradebook for me. We'll notice that it says availability. Availability is hidden from students, so I know right away students don't have access. One of the nice features is if I click on this drop down, this is how you always edit. You have the option to edit the test, which takes me back to that test canvas page, that very first page that we were on, where I can actually edit the questions itself. I can do edit the test options, which allows me to change the test options on that page we were just on. How do students basically access it? And like I said, one of the nice features we have is this make available right here. So I can easily just do make available. It's going to change it and set it right to available. Now, if it was unavailable due to a display after or a display until date, it would show not available and it will become available on, or it was last available on. So it tells me right then and there why students might not be able to access it right from there. We do have lots of other options in here. I don't go over all of these. If you're interested in any of them, let us know, and we can walk you through what kind of those settings mean and what they do. All right, so now we have it available, ready for our students to take. So now we could go in and take it as a student. So I'm going to go into my student preview so I can actually take this, see it from student side, all of that kind of goodness. And so there's my test. Notice there's both of those pieces combined, the instructions and the description combined. When I click on it, now it's telling me just the instructions, not the description, because I unchecked that box for the description not to show. It tells me how much time. It tells me the notified, but I can continue and submit. The test can be saved and resumed later. I like to mention that it says this because students read that and they go, oh, I can leave the test whenever I want. but they don't read the second part. The timer will continue to run if you leave the test. Again, the timer starts the moment they click begin, and it runs until time runs out or they submit it. So just know that. It does tell them the timer does continue to run, even though they may claim that it doesn't and they didn't know that. Tells them multiple attempts. It would tell me if it had a due date. It would give me a lot of that information from that test options page. So when I'm ready to start, I click begin. So we start with this test information. Notice it gives me my description and my instructions in this area. So if I don't want any of this, I want to go all the way back to that very first page when we very first started to remove that or edit that. It does tell me how much time, allowing multiple attempts. If this takes up a lot of room, I can also click on test information so that it collapses it, so that I get more test real estate on this page. Notice there's my timer. You'll notice it kind of ticks across the screen to let me know kind of how long, both visually as well as numerically, how much time I have left. And then I have my questions down below. As I start to answer, it will actually save my answer for me here in a second. It runs on a timer. Sometimes it's really quick and sometimes it takes a while, and it's taking a while this time. There we go. So now it's saved it. And then I can move to my next question because I did say one question at a time. You'll also notice under this question completion status, it gives me all my questions. I can answer my questions. I can click my save, and it will actually save and show me what questions I've answered versus what questions maybe I skipped. That's nice. If I go, you know what, I don't know question 3 yet, but let me go ahead and skip to question 4. I'm going to answer question 4, but now I can easily click on question 3 to move back to my question that I didn't answer. Not a big deal in 4 questions. But if I have 50 questions and I'm going one question at a time, it might be hard to get from question 50 back to question 3 by going back. And you can only submit on the last question, and then so going back to next. So this allows an easy movement through it. Also, again, same thing, if you'll have all questions at one time, it might be difficult to find question number 17 amongst 100 questions, where I could easily click on that and it'd take me right to question 17. And so I could answer my question here, continue on, and you'll notice it'll tell me which questions I've answered. Once I get done, I can then click my save and submit. It gives me a little confirmation number, or a confirmation button that I'm about to submit it. If I didn't answer a question, it would also warn me you forgot to answer this question. I could cancel to go back, or I can click OK to submit. So it starts by giving me information about when did I submit it and how long I took it. I click OK, and now it's going to show me whatever information that me as the instructor have allowed. So my submitted answers and incorrect answered questions. So it gives me that score, lets me know what questions I got right and wrong over here, and then what I selected. And so all of that kind of appears then in this area. And so I click OK, and it would take me back to this area again. So let me exit out here. And so that kind of concludes, you know, kind of how do I build the test, how do students take it. So I'm going to ask one more, nope, sorry, I'm going to skip that question. Let me see. All right, so now I'm going to look at now how do I as a faculty member now grade that test. So in the control panel under Grade Center, we have 2 options, needs grading and full grade center. If I go to needs grading, nothing is showing in here right now because nothing is needing to be graded. I only had multiple choice questions, so everything automatically graded for me. But if it went over the time limit, if it was submitted after the due date, or if it had something that needed to be graded, such as an essay or short answer, it would appear in this needs grading area. So let me switch back over here, just so you have an idea. So here it shows, you know, I can select the category, I can grade all. Basically, I click on the person's name and it would open up that exam, and then it would take me through, once I submitted it, it would actually take me to the next student and let me move through each student all at one time. And so then here's just an example of what grading an essay looks like, so that those that use essays have an idea. It's going to give them the question, what the student answered as the given answer. If I entered in the correct answer in that test question whenever I was creating it, it would also give me that. I have the ability to do a response feedback. Excuse me. And then also enter the point value up in the top right hand corner for how many points they earned on that particular test question. Let me flip back over here then. So those are kind of different ways. That's one way that you can grade through needs grading. Since this was something that automatically submitted, as well as if I did grade something through needs grading, if I go to the full grade center, I now have access to the test here. And so here's that test that I completed. So I have different options to grade. I can click on the drop down. I can go to grade attempts here. I can grade questions. This is where I mentioned you can go through and actually grade, do full credit on a test, basically give full points on an option. This is one of the ways you can do it. It's also nice if you have like multiple essays or multiple short answers. You could grade one essay question all at once instead of having to mentally flip between, okay, I'm asking this question, no, I'm answering this question. Okay, next test, now I'm answering this question, now I'm answering this question. I could grade all of the same question at one time. Again, there's a lot of different options in here that I'm not going to go over everything. If there's anything in here that you are wondering what it is, let us know and we can walk you through it. Also, if there's ever anything that you're like, I wish it would do this, talk to us. There might be a way to do it in one of those settings. So here's my test. If I click on the drop down for that cell, I do have the option to view grade details, or down at the bottom, I can actually click on the attempt and be taken straight into the attempt so I can see what that particular student submitted and answered as. I'm going to go to view grade details. This then gives me information about when it was submitted, points, stuff like that. I can also view the attempt this way. I could clear the attempt or ignore the attempt if I want to allow them to take the test again. So they reached their maximum number of submissions, something went wrong, I could allow them to take it again. I generally recommend doing the ignore attempt over the clear attempt. That way you can keep track of over the course if somebody is continually saying, hey, this happened, can you let me do it again? You can easily go back to another test to say, did I allow you to retake it? And start to see any patterns that might be emerging. So I generally recommend you do the ignore the attempt. So I'm going to do view attempt just so we can see again. So this is how the instructor sees it. As the instructor, I always see the question, give an answer, correct answer, whether it's right or wrong, how many points. I could also then come through and say, okay, you know what, for us in Texas, you know, especially right now with our heat, it might be yellow. So I'm going to change this particular student's to 10 points. And so I could give this one student 10 points because they made a valid case for why they answered it this way, but not necessarily give everyone the points because not everyone asked for that additional point value. So I'm not going to do that right now. Also under test information, there is this access log. This is another way that if a student submits after the due date and you want to be able to know where were they at. So if my test was supposed to be completed by 2:33, I can see that questions 2, 3, 4 were all answered after 2:33. Well, I guess they weren't, most of them were. I answered after 2:33. But I could see, drill down and say, okay, these are the questions. I might decide to go back in and say, okay, even though you got question 3 and 4 right, I'm not going to accept them because they were submitted after the due date. And you could then go back in here and say, okay, I'm going to remove those point values from there because you submitted after the due date. Also, you can clear the attempt from here as well. You can also, if you realize you had a bad question, you can edit the test and it'll take you right into the test to be able to look for that test question to make edits to as well. Again, if I wanted to add in a point value, I could add it in, submit, and we'll notice instead of 40 points, now it's saying the student got 50 points. And so you can do it that way as well. So that is how basically you can then grade as well. Let me switch back over here real quick so that you can see some additional information here. So inside the gradebook, you might see a few different icons. A number, of course, means the student has submitted it, it's been graded. A yellow exclamation mark means it's needing graded. Either there's an essay or short answer, or they submitted after the time limit was over, or they submitted after the due date. Basically, it's indicating to you something needs to be looked at on this test, and you need to look into what's going on there. If you see the blue circle, then this means that the student is in progress in completing the test. Either they're currently in the test, or that they didn't get it submitted. You can actually, with tests at least, not anything else, but you can go into a test and submit a test for a student. Just make sure it is after the test is no longer available, because you don't want somebody to be in there and you submit it on them. But you do have that ability to do that as well. All right, so last couple of things, just so you have an idea, let me go back into student preview here. So students can go back to lessons, click on the test. If they click begin, because I have additional options, additional submissions available to me, I can start a new submission here, or I can view all attempts. But they can also go to my grades. They can look for their test, basically. They click on the title of the test. They can then see all of their attempts. They can also click on the grade itself to be able to review their test. And you can see here that my third answer I got partial credit for, and so it's kind of giving me that notification that I did get partial credit for this. So it does give me kind of all of those different options when taking a test. All right, so I'm gonna ask, I got another little question that I'm gonna launch here. So I want to know, just as kind of a follow-up, make sure people were kind of listening to me. I know I was going really fast. I want to kind of do a quick checkup on, you know, did people kind of understand? So I'm thinking back to those settings, those test settings. What were some of the recommended settings that I recommended when using, when you're creating a test? This is a multiple select, so you can select more than one answer. Again, I'm just trying to get kind of a feel for, you know, is this session going too fast? You know, do we need to break it up or shorten it or something like that? Just trying to see kind of what settings were recommended, so that we have an idea of, are we on track here? Give everyone just a little bit of time here. Almost got everyone answered. Got just a couple more people. I'm gonna give just another half a minute too. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and end this now. So it looks like got pretty good answers here. Did get a couple of people that selected the option for forced completion. So I'm going to reiterate, please don't select forced completion. There are valid reasons for it, so I don't want to fully disclaim that as being a bad option, but it is something that we really do not recommend. And then the other option that's kind of the one that we don't always recommend is present all questions at once. There is reasons for doing it that way, so don't get me wrong by that. But typically we do, oh, I did do two of them. Oh, no, sorry. The present all questions one at a time is the preferred method over all questions at once. Again, there are reasons for both the forced completion and the all questions at once. Just saying there are different things like that going on. All right. And then, so let me switch back over here. And so I'm going to follow up here. All right, so kind of wrapping up. So that's kind of what I have for all of it, all of the how do you do tests and stuff like that. If you have any questions, please let us know. Like I said, there are a lot more options and features. There's things like item analysis so that you can actually see you know, what percentage of students got the answer correct versus incorrect to determine was it maybe a badly worded question or a bad question. There are a lot of additional kind of settings and features that are available. So if you're interested in anything, or like I mentioned before, if there's something that you're like, I really wish I knew how to do this, or I really want to do this, let us know. It may be a setting that I just haven't been able to go over today. So let us know. If you need any help, you want any help, please let us know. All of our information is up there. I'm going to launch one more poll just to kind of get a little feel for how comfortable are you with creating tests now that going through this. I'm going to talk about a few other things. Again, if you need any help, let us know. If you were one of the ones that had been having ITS help you import your tests, you're still more than welcome to have us help you with that. We don't necessarily want you creating every test from scratch, one question at a time, because that can be very time consuming. We don't necessarily go over the Respondus software that I mentioned before, that Respondus 4.0 test building software. It is something that you're welcome to get. And like I said, we're more than happy to help build some of that. This is really meant for if you really do want to do it on your own, as well as so that you understand how all of those different kind of components work and function. You have an idea of what's going on with all of that. Again, we just want to make sure you do have the help that you need. So please let us know if you have any questions, you need any help in anything related to taking tests for sure. I will be sending out an email today, maybe tomorrow. It just depends on how many other emails I kind of got today with both the recording for this as well as kind of a wrap up and some additional kind of information that you may be interested in concerning this. And like I said, I was going to check to see any other questions. Nope, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. Thank you all so much for attending. We do appreciate all of y'all coming in. Don't forget, we do have other ones. How do you do assignments? How do you do discussions, as well as some additional ones coming up in a couple of weeks as well, that you're more than welcome to attend. We love having people come to our sessions. So thank you, and that is all that I have for everyone.